We are witnessing a deep and unprecedented crisis, striking at the very heart of the priesthood. According to Monsignor Schneider, the ruin is rooted in a dark design, which is emptying the faith from within, forming priests ready to obey, but unable to discern. The Church, instead of resisting, is bending. If you want to understand the reasons for this phenomenon and its impact on the future of the faith, it is essential to listen to these considerations. Priestly formation is vital for the destiny of the Church, and yet in many contexts, it shows gaps that endanger the soundness of the clergy. In seminaries, there is a marked imbalance between theological and philosophical teaching. On the one hand, the magisterium is transmitted with a certain orthodoxy, although often marked by an excessive influence of the Second Vatican Council, while on the other hand, robust philosophical preparation is lacking. This lack is not an insignificant detail, but a weakness with real repercussions in the lives of priests and consequently in the governance of the Church. The problem arises because, without a solid philosophical basis that integrates logic and metaphysics, theology runs the risk of being received in a too fideistic way. Faith, in fact, is founded on reason, as St. Thomas Aquinas teaches. If we neglect this hierarchy, we nurture a mentality that perceives doctrine not as an unchanging heritage to be guarded, but as a set of truths susceptible to adaptations according to the ecclesiastical authorities of the moment. This represents a concrete danger. In the absence of a rational foundation, one ends up believing that obedience to the hierarchy is an absolute value, forgetting that the authority of the Church is always subordinate to the truth of Christ. Monsignor Schneider has emphasized how, after the Second Vatican Council, perennial and sound philosophy has been gradually abandoned in seminaries, leaving young priests without the intellectual tools necessary to distinguish truth from ideological drifts. Pope Pius X was so aware of this that he proposed 24 Thomistic theses as an essential basis for formation. Today, however, that awareness seems to be weakening, and many priests, lacking a solid logical structure, become vulnerable to the theological fashions of the moment or to modernist drifts. A significant episode recounted by Monsignor Schneider himself concerns the French philosopher Jean Guiton, a friend of Pope Paul VI. After the council, the pontiff wanted to understand why so many priests were abandoning the ministry, and the answer was unequivocal. Insufficient philosophical formation was one of the main causes. Without a solid capacity for reasoning and discernment, and without a well-defined logic, convictions become fragile, subject to the changes of time instead of remaining rooted in the eternal truth of the faith. The Church has always tried to maintain a balance between reason and faith, avoiding both the extremes of rationalism and fideism. Weakness in philosophical formation is not just a theoretical issue, but has direct repercussions on the life of the Church. A priest who lacks solid logical and metaphysical foundations finds himself without the necessary tools to distinguish what is authentically in line with tradition from a doctrinal deviation disguised as obedience. Over time, this has generated a generation of priests, well-formed in the magisterium, but unable to recognize when certain interpretations of the faith deviate from revealed truth. St. Thomas Aquinas reminds us, in fact, that just as grace presupposes nature, faith requires reason. A solid theology cannot be built without proper training in thought. For this reason, the Church has always supported perennial philosophy as the foundation of priestly formation, not only as a theoretical discipline, but as an indispensable tool for an orderly development of theological thought. Monsignor Schneider has emphasized how the absence of robust philosophical preparation exposes priests to two main dangers. On the one hand, the danger of falling into fideistic error, an attitude that excludes the contribution of reason and reduces faith to a passive acceptance of doctrines. On the other hand, the ease with which they are attracted to modern ideologies that, under the guise of a theological update, move away from tradition. Without strong philosophical foundations, priests lose the rational criteria to correctly assess doctrinal deviations. This situation makes a thorough review of seminary formation necessary. The crisis is not the result of chance or isolated errors, but the result of decisions that have led to the formation of weak priests, unable to resist and discern. A clergy educated more in blind obedience than in the search for truth becomes easily manipulated, unable to oppose when the faith is distorted in the name of progress or change. If a priest lacks the philosophical and theological basis to recognize error, how can he defend the church from deviations? This is how a church guided instead of guiding is created. And at that point, by whom? Insufficient philosophical formation is not just an internal problem, but has a direct impact on pastoral care and the relationship between priests and the faithful. Finally, a clergy not accustomed to logical rigor and rational discernment runs the risk of transmitting an emotive faith based more on feeling than on truth. This phenomenon is observed in many parishes, where catechesis is often superficial and unable to address the intellectual challenges of the modern world. Without adequate preparation, the priest runs the risk of becoming a mere repeater of formulas, unable to explain, argue, and defend doctrine firmly. The fragility derived from this deficiency manifests itself in a Christian community increasingly inclined to relativism and the ideologies of the moment, in a time when moral uncertainty is making its way into all areas of daily life. If the priest does not have the tools to reject such influences, how can he then lead the faithful towards the truth? It is for this reason that philosophy does not represent a mere academic adornment, but an indispensable pastoral necessity. Solid thought, founded on rigorous principles, makes preaching more incisive and profound, capable of speaking not only to the heart, but also to reason, reinforcing the link between tradition and contemporary demands. Monsignor Schneider has observed that throughout history, the deepest crises of the Church have often been preceded by a decline in the quality of philosophical and theological formation. Such intellectual weakness has allowed the most dangerous heresies to germinate in environments where logic and metaphysics had been neglected, opening the way to distorted interpretations of the faith. Today we are facing a similar situation in which the lack of dialogue between reason and tradition threatens to undermine the pillars of Christian doctrine. Without robust intellectual preparation, the clergy finds itself without the necessary tools to identify and combat doctrinal errors that creep in even within the Church itself. The solution does not lie in superficial reforms or temporary new pastoral methods, but in a serious return to the study of classical philosophy and an authentically Catholic theology. It is essential that seminaries rediscover the value of perennial philosophy, paying special attention to the thought of St. Thomas Aquinas, whose contribution has always been considered by the Church as the surest guide for a solid intellectual and spiritual formation. Only a deep and systematic recovery of the philosophical roots can guarantee a renewal that strengthens both the mind and soul of the clergy. The adoption of a curriculum that focuses on logical rigor, the study of metaphysics, and critical confrontation with the challenges of our time is essential to train priests who know how to resist passing theological fashions and external pressures. In this context, the rediscovery of the contribution of eminent figures such as St. Thomas Aquinas is not only a tribute to the past, but represents a vital investment for the future of the Church. Only in this way will it be possible to train a clergy capable of facing the challenges of our time, sustained by the strength of truth and immune to the drifts of relativism. A clergy formed on solid intellectual and spiritual foundations will not only defend the purity of doctrine, but will also know how to offer the faithful, enlightened, and constant guidance, capable of inspiring confidence in a constantly changing world. Rigorous formation will thus become the pillar on which a ministry capable of uniting tradition and modernity will be based. guaranteeing an authentic and lasting faith for generations to come. What do you think? If you liked the video, comment Amen. God bless you.